hit the record button. Just really an opportunity to talk about the Capital Region Transportation Council, what the MPO is, what we do. And for you folks who are planning committee members, sort of what your role is, what our expectations are for you as members, what you may have questions about, give you that opportunity to ask. For those of you who are in the room, who've been on the committee for a while and kind of know how it operates, feel free to jump in with different perspectives. I have a presentation I'll walk through. For some of you, this might be things you already know, so please bear with me, but I just thought it was important to kind of take this moment to, given that we have a lot of new members, we've had a lot of change in the region and in our world here at the council over this last 5 years. We retired 5 employees about 5 years ago that had well over 30 years of experience each here. So our staff is completely new. I'm a new-ish director. I'm 2 years into it now, but although I was a staff member here for many years, so that's a change. We heard Bob talk about all the changes within the department. I mean, they're just changes all around us, right? And I know with the membership here, things have changed as well. So some of this might be new to you, some of this might not, but again, feel free to ask any questions as we go on, and we'll do the best we can to answer them. So, let me just get the agenda question. So what the heck is an MPO, right? We're one of these creatures of federal government. That's the simplest way I like to explain it. All MPOs are designated by the governors of their states and the affected local governments in the areas that we represent. So populated areas of 50,000 or more people are part of an MPO. Areas of 200,000 or more people are also designated what's called a transportation management area. That's a technical term for some of the additional work we have to do as an MPO, one of which is the congestion management process. So this is intended to target some of the larger regions of the country with some additional requirements. But our primary goal is to lead the metropolitan transportation planning process. So if you were at our meeting this morning, we talked about the urbanized areas a little bit. The MPOs are designated based on these urbanized areas. Our Albany Schenectady urbanized area is what's called a large urbanized area. That's one of those ones that's over 200,000 people. The Saratoga Springs urbanized area is what's now called a medium-sized urbanized area. They have 50,000 or more people. So those colors on your screen, you have the yellow and the light blue. And just brand new to this new census, they've designated what we have now small urban areas. So the Mechanicville area has been carved out as a small urban area, and the Ravina Bethlehem area in southern Albany County has also been designated a small urban area. So while there's not yet, to our knowledge, and this is still, I guess, we're learning, there's no federal transportation funds dedicated to small urban areas yet. There are dedicated funds to the large urban and to the medium. So what is the metropolitan planning process, the transportation planning process? This is a lot of words to essentially say, we look to plan for a good transportation system, one that thinks about the mobility needs of all the users of the system. We try to work with economic developers, economic development community to ensure that, we're fostering economic growth and we're not, we're continuing to move the region forward, connecting housing and employment, building in resiliency. All of these things that, we've probably heard us talk about a million times, and it's really boiled down to these 10 planning factors that we need to consider in all of our work. So economic vitality, safety, security, accessibility, mobility options, quality of life in the environment, connections and integration of the transportation system, how we efficiently manage and operate the system, the system, the resiliency and reliability of the system, and even enhancing travel and tourism, which is a topic that we don't often talk a lot about here at this table, but we're going to in this next long range plan update, because I think we undercount the impacts that travel and tourism has on our regional transportation. So I don't think we talk about that enough. So for the planning committee and the policy board, the whole process is grounded in this idea of what's called a 3C decision-making process. It's continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive. Continuing, I think, is pretty straightforward. It means that we consistently are updating and reacting to change. We're also trying to be proactive and thinking about different things, but we're always assessing what's going on in the region. The cooperative is probably the most important thing for you folks here as planning committee members. This is where we talk about not only all the different modes and all the different issues, but how you guys relate to each other when we're doing the decisions and making the decisions, right? Everything we do here is by consensus, which means we have to have everybody's cooperation on what's brought to the table, how it's brought to the table, including from the staff. And comprehensive, goes without saying. It's just making sure that everybody has the opportunity to be involved and making sure all the key players have a seat at the table. As well as making sure that we hit the scope of the planning process. So going back to those 10 planning factors. But our underlying purpose is really to provide that forum that allows us and you folks to provide input to us, allows us to provide best practices to you, and allows for a robust discussion at the table when tough topics come up. So this is a really messy graphic, but it tries to illustrate a little bit about how the MPO is set up and who participates. And I think one thing that often gets lost when we talk about an MPO and the Transportation Council is you might hear me occasionally say the MPO is the policy board. The MPO is not me. It is not this staff. It's not you guys. The MPO is truly the policy board. Your elected officials, all the agency heads, they're really the decision-making body of the MPO. What they have done is delegated a lot of responsibility to you as planning committee members, and to us as staff, and to advisory committees and all these folks that are part of the process. And we're going to talk about a little bit about that today. But the public and the stakeholders also clearly have a role in the process through their involvement in each step of this process. So just as a reminder, for in case anybody's new to us, our policy board right now is comprised of the representative, usually the mayor of the 8 cities. We have 2 voting members for each of the 4 counties. We have 2 rotating town and village representatives. We also have a permanent seat from the town of Colony, and the reason the town of Colony has a permanent seat is years ago there was a decision made here that any community with 50,000 or more people deserves a seat at the table. So that's the reason the town of Colony has a permanent seat by virtue of its size. In addition to all those municipal governments and local government entities, we have our state and regional planning partners. So CDTA, DOT, the Regional Planning Commission. And the 3 at the bottom are listed there because, not only are they part of the MPO, they all are voting entities of Thruway, the Airport Authority, and the Port of Albany. But I know sometimes people ask why. Why are they part of this? Part of the Metropolitan Transportation Planning process is we deal with all surface transportation. And so, even those 3 agencies and organizations, some of the functionality of what they do certainly impacts the surface transportation system. You might think, oh, well, the airport, we're not regulating or planning how the airport deals with the air side of the business. But when, as you saw, for those of you that attended the presentation from the airport on the master plan, when you're talking about, future planning and they're adding, new gates, new capacity, perhaps adding garage space, this is where those interrelationships come into play, right? And they all have to be part of the process here at the table. So as I said earlier, the policy board is the governing board, that consensus voting, that cooperative piece. Everything we try to do here is obviously open to the public and try to be as inclusive as we can be. The policy board and with their actions, they set the framework for all of the transportation decisions that get made here. And they really are charged with making those final planning and programming decisions on everything that we do. And as you probably are aware, they meet quarterly. And as I said earlier, they delegate a lot of authority to you guys as planning committee members. So just two definitions, because sometimes I think we throw terms around, and one of the things that our staff is working on is we're gonna have a glossary of terms and acronyms for you. Because we use a lot of lingo, we understand that. And it's actually amazing when you actually put it to paper, how much lingo and acronyms there really are. But we're gonna post that eventually on the planning committee or the policy board pages or both, but we'll definitely have that for you folks. But two things that when looking at what the federal law actually says and how that translates to what we do here, when we use the term planning. In this context, it's setting the strategy for meeting a transportation need or achieving some kind of a desired income. So for outcomes. So for us, planning starts with our regional transportation plan, or what's now known as the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. It's currently known as New Visions 2050. And we're going to be working through an update process over this next year and a half, almost 2 years, which you guys will all be heavily engaged in. And then on the programming side, you might hear that word programming a lot. You're probably wondering, why is that document called a Unified Planning Work Program? The program word is just referring to this definition of that term, which is it's scheduling work and assigning funds to implement plans and projects, right? That's all that term is really meaning. So if you ever wondered, question answer. That's also why the TIP is referred to as the Transportation Improvement Program. You know, it's just tied to that definition of programming. So, you know, for you folks, this is where I wanted to spend a little more time today and have some open dialogue. The planning committee, when you look at the ways MPOs around the country function, they all have some kind of entity like the planning committee. They're often called technical advisory committees in a lot of them. But this group, the planning committee, is our technical advisory committee to the policy board. And as we like to say internally here at STEP, this is where the real work gets done, right? You guys are really the ones guiding and shaping what gets presented to your policy board counterpart. And they have entrusted in you by appointing you to serve on the planning committee to serve that role. Planning committee meets 8 times a year, and you guys know that. Subtle differences in the representation at the planning committee. Each county only gets 1 vote here at the planning committee level. There's 1 rotating town and village member instead of 2. We still have the 8 cities, we still have the town of Colleen, and we still have all the regional folks. If you were to ask me why that was done that way, I cannot answer that. That was a decision made in the 1960s that there probably was a valid reason for it at the time, but I can't seem to find that information in anything written. But that is the operating process. But in terms of your responsibilities as a member, one of the things that we really ask of you as a member is to keep your policy board counterpart informed on what's being discussed here. We know that everybody has short attention spans, but also your elected officials in particular are being pulled in 7 bazillion different directions, and maybe transportation is not the most important thing that day. But it's your task to like grab them for even just 5 minutes and say, hey, just to let you know, this funding opportunity is coming up, or they're talking about this issue that I know you're really interested in, or, you know, whatever these things that you're learning, we do ask that you help us by keeping those lines of communication open with your elected officials, your CEOs, your whoever your counterparts are, so that the information gets exchanged and the policy board members, because one of the biggest changes that I've observed being here for so long, timeframes used to be a lot longer than they are now. We used to be able to bring something like a tip to our policy board in March and it was all done. They reviewed it and then they released it for public review. We had months to review it and then June they would adopt it. Those days are gone. So unfortunately, we've been forced into this situation where the policy board doesn't have as much of an opportunity to have its hands on things to make policy anymore. So that's why you guys are so important to this whole process, because you really are their representatives, and making sure that they stay informed on what's going on here is really important. The other piece in your role is when you're here, we understand that a lot of you are here because of your jurisdictional role, right? Your day job. You've been appointed here to represent community X, agency X, whatever it is. But when you're thinking about how we do things here, we also want you to think about the region as a whole. The people who aren't at the table, the smaller communities, the ones that maybe don't have the voice that we need to be able to represent those perspectives in some way. County level folks are particularly well versed in this because you guys, probably more than a lot of the other organizations and communities, have a better handle on what the needs are from some of those rural communities that maybe we don't get a direct line of communication for. There's an looming issue that we're not aware of. So, you know, when you're making a decision here, you have questions. That's why I even illustrated this morning, some of the members were asking questions, may not even have been about their own community, but it was about some bigger topic that is beyond the borders, or maybe impacts everyone in the region. And the whole point here is to make sure all the voices are heard. And then because of our consensus voting process, the way we operate by consensus, which is not, I won't say it's unusual, but there's different ways MPOs have chosen to have their voting. Consensus voting has worked well for us since the 60s, honestly. But consensus voting requires a lot of that. Going back to that word cooperation again, it does require a lot of cooperation and sometimes give and take by all the parties. So in this example, I'm just gonna mention, like DOT and CDTA, we know like they're two of our larger partners. They're bigger organizations. They have access to more staff, more funding, etc. And they could easily walk in here at any time and demand all the money, right? Because we know that they could have the ability to spend it, but they don't do that. And that's part of the cooperation. And we expect the same of local governments too. So when you're thinking about TIP project proposals, or you're thinking about planning studies, you need to think about it in the context of what are the resources available? And is my ask really the most important? Is it the most reasonable? I've seen in past years, and the guilty parties remain silent, or not silent, secret. There was one community years ago that submitted 100 roadway projects to TIP. 1 year, 100. And is that really the spirit of what the MPO is doing now? Right, so you do have to think about in your jurisdictions, or when you're applying for TIP funding, or working in your communities or in the regions that you serve, what is reasonable, and work together, even outside of these meetings. I'm not naive to the fact that you guys all talk outside of this group, right? It happens. And that's fine, but that's also part of the process, and what I hope happens in those conversations is if someone has a tough challenge, they have an issue, and they're not sure how to approach it, that you're calling upon your partners to kind of gain some insight into, hey, how have you addressed this issue? Or what options do I have? Or, you have more experience in this, maybe you can help me out. And if you ever have questions as a member or somebody who knows there's a challenge with something locally, you can always call us staff, certainly, the regional staff, local programs bureau, but we expect those conversations to happen outside the planning committee meetings, because by the time it reaches the planning committee table, we're expecting and hopefully anticipating that most of these hard discussions have already been had before they get into the room. As you guys all know, we have a lot of hard discussions at the table, and there's just some discussions that are always going to be hard and require us to spend time. TIP update is always a time of year where, we're asking a lot of you guys, probably attending more meetings than you really want to in some cases, but it's an important part of the process. Because, it gives everybody that voice, and everybody to be as transparent as we can be with these federal funds that we've been designated to be a steward of. And so again, our success is really dependent on that collaboration. We have to trust each other, we have to respect each other, and we have to cooperate. And, I think the more we all get to know each other, again, there's a lot of new faces at the table, and the more we interact, and you have a project, maybe you have a roadway project and you're collaborating with CDTA because there's a piece of this project that's, part of their world, or, whatever these things are. These are the conversations that you guys as members, we hope you're having, even without us staff being involved. you know, I think you guys know our role. We provide all the technical support as staff members. You know, we're preparing all the stuff, we're making sure we're meeting all the federal compliance, we're dealing with all the stuff that you guys really don't want to deal with, but it's important to the process. And, you know, I think more in recent years than even in the past, we've been really trying to engage the public more broadly and get more input into this process, because a lot of people don't know who we are. I know we staff think we're the most important thing, and you guys all know Capital Region Transportation Council, or, you know, formerly CDTC. But I'm sure if I were asked 9 out of 10 people on the street would have no idea, and most of them would probably say I'm CDTA.
Yeah.
Which is also part of the reason why we changed the name. So, you know, I think we're not expecting to become an organization that's like in the news and all of that, but I do think that we can do a better job of making sure that we're connecting to people in the community at large that care about these broader transportation issues, care about community quality of life, care about the quality of their community's climate, all of these things. Safety, there's so many ways we can engage and interrelate with everybody, but I think we're trying to do more and more of that. And again, the public, you know, provides a lot of perspective on things. We have a lot of stakeholders and, you know, one who has an interest in something, right? But how do they engage with us? And this is actually, like I just said, this is something we're working on. I mean, clearly the policy board and planning committee meetings are open to the public. People can come and speak, they can comment. That's the obvious stuff. We have advisory committee meetings. We have a number of advisory committee meetings. Some of them, and we're actually looking at our operations plan right now, to figure out how to better define the roles of these committees and what is their advisory function and how do you folks receive that advice when it comes to you. So for example, let's say the active transportation group says, we think that, you know, it's not a good idea in the region to have 14-foot travel lanes. I'm just picking a number here. And they bring that to the planning committee. What do you guys do with that information? Right. And this is what we're trying to figure out is what is their advisory role and how do they present ideas to the planning committee members so that it can inform your decision making as we move along. That's something we're working on. And as I said earlier, we have a lot of ongoing public participation opportunities, given all of our planning work, the local projects that we do in your communities and what have you. So again, our role at the MPO is to provide all that information to make these important planning and programming decisions. I think you're all familiar with the core planning products, but you know, just as a reminder, again, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, that's the guidance document that sets the policy framework for how we are to assign federal transportation funds to projects in our region. This one's updated every 5 years. It's due in September of 2025. Why it matters to you? When you think about how we assign funds to the TIP, it starts with the MTP and the priorities that we have established in that regional transportation plan, because that feeds into the evaluation criteria, that feeds into how we divide up the money. There's a financial plan component to our long range transportation plan. So that's why it's really important for you folks to engage and be a part of the development of that plan. Because it can be as broad or as narrow as we want it to be. Right now, our plan is very broad. But we say all of these things are important. We don't really give weight to anything. Maybe that's fine, maybe that's not, but that's part of what we need to discuss as a group. Maybe we do need to put some weight on things, maybe we don't. Maybe climate's more important, maybe preservation is more important. You know, we can figure that out. And it's not to discount the importance of other things. But when you have limited funds to invest in the system, what are the things we're going to go for first? And that's really guided by that MTP. The Transportation Improvement Program, that's updated roughly, you know, no less than every 4 years. In this area, we usually update it on 3-year cycles. We used to do it every other year, which was even more interesting than doing it every 3 years. But the next one's due, at least on paper, in June of 2025 as well. So we'll be talking a lot over this next year about the TIP And unfortunately, our timing is gonna be off with our MTP update and the tip, so it's not gonna align as neatly as staff would like it to, but. You know, again, we're working on updating a lot of the things in our transportation improvement program evaluation process and how we approach it, because a lot has changed in federal law. Not only in this last two-year period, but over this last 10, 15, 20 years since I started here. When I first started at the MPO, there were probably about 4 federal fund sources. They were pretty broadly categorized, and a lot more, a much higher percentage of the federal funds were sub-allocated to MPOs back then. Now we have, I believe, 80 total federal programs, half of which are discretionary. Only a certain amount of that is actually designated to be signed and spent at MPOs. The rest, as we were talking about this morning, is at the discretion of the department in terms of what gets sub-allocated to the MPOs and how much. But I can tell you in all honesty, just on the federal highway side, because we also deal with the FTA side, most of which goes to CDTA for obvious reasons. You're only major transit provider in the region. And thankfully, because I hear what happens in the MPOs that have multiple transit authorities, and that would be interesting. But, you know, that shift and that change has done a couple of things. One, you know, we used to program on the federal highway side about $100 million a year in $1990. This last tip, we roughly programmed the federal highway side after, and even before the set asides, as I recall, about $75 million a year. So you can see how the buying power has been reduced, some of which is beyond our control, so the way the federal law was written. Some of it is just changes in how DOT has chosen to use the federal program in the state. There's just been changes, and that has also led to, because of all of these fund source programs, a compartmentalizing of how we, you know, what's the eligibility for something that's in the carbon reduction program versus something that's in the highway safety improvement program versus something that's eligible for the national highway program. And there's a lot of acronyms and stuff.
Right.
And so it's getting increasingly challenging even for us staff to justify an evaluation process that's used the same across all of these program categories.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why we have at the TIP task force, it's, you know, a subcommittee of this group to talk about that and a whole host of other things that I think we haven't really talked about and changed as the evolution of the federal program has occurred. You know, we have no idea what's gonna happen in 2024 nationally. We have no idea what Congress is going to do. It could go vastly different ways, right? And this next federal bill is going to be authorized under this new administration or the continuation of the current. We have no idea what's going to happen. A lot of money was put into this federal program this last couple of years, and I think it goes without saying, you can read the news just as easy as me. Not everybody thinks that was a good idea. So what happens, you know, because the needs that we all have are still there. They're not going away. You know, we are in an older part of the country where our infrastructure is older, it's aging, and we've got to, you know, do our best we can to replace what we can. But at the same time, you know, we do want to promote growth. All regions do. And it's increasingly challenging. So those are things that we'll be talking more about at the tip table. And like I said, for you folks, when you're thinking about what's the most important, highest priorities for me, my community to bring to the planning committee as a project proposal idea, that's where thinking about the MTP and its priorities are. That's where thinking about even that CMP we talked about this morning comes in. Some of the plans that you guys have worked on locally, you know, what are those things that are tied to those plans that could best compete for these funds? And that's just at our table. And then you have the discretionary federal programs, which, you know, I don't know, I'd love to see by a show of hands, if you don't mind, you know, how many of your communities have applied for a discretionary program grant at this point? And for most of you, is it because of staff capacity, or is it just uncertainty, or just you don't feel like it's worth our community? So
define for me again the discretionary.
So these are like the ones that are, they have these notices of funding opportunities that come out from the Federal Highway Administration. And they say the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program, or seeking applications from local governments.
So
Like
the
those
direct
kinds of-
federal ones,
Yeah.
yeah, not usually.
Those tend to be for like larger projects.
Yeah.
aren't
Right.
they? And like, so.
That's what I was wondering if it was
Can't
that.
compete because we
Yeah.
don't have projects of that size, and that's where we're gonna
Whatever.
talk about it, maybe collaborating with other municipalities.
Right, and so that's why I asked that question, because that's the feedback I have gotten as well, is I think individually, the communities in our region are too small and probably don't have the projects of a scale large
It's-
enough to be
It's an
competitive.
eligibility question. It's like, well, if you have a subway that's elevated, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Or like that one, presentation,
Mhm.
City of Tampa had a $20 million project sitting on the shelf waiting to be funded.
Yeah,
They got the first award.
right,
Yeah.
and even the department, you guys have struggled with,
Yeah, we're
This
still,
shovel
we're still
ready.
home for,
Yeah.
our applications.
Yeah, there's
I-
ones that the elected officials, the senator sends out, and look at all these grants available, but
yeah,
We do those, well, same one, those talking about Tampa, you had to get that back. Which was brutal, because it was gonna take 2 more years, and we just couldn't
yeah,
wait.
the time didn't work out.
Or like we're working on Safe Streets for All, it's
Mhm.
the process just to get through that document to be eligible for implementation money is a lot.
It's heavy, it's a heavy workload, a lot of requirements, and, you know, when you have multiple partners, as you know, working with us. You know, we get tied into, you know, how quickly the communities are able to navigate their own local processes, so yeah, I get that. And that's one of the things that, you know, we're all challenged by for sure, and as Bob said, you know, they're still trying to figure out how to get a win on some of these programs, because it's been challenging to access some of those discretionary funds.
Yeah, and the only thing, I don't wanna, it's not necessarily just the size, though, I know that, you know, our federal partners are in the selection business, but they wanna be in the ribbon cutting business, and so. Some of it is that the regulatory stuff, your environmental stuff is done down there, that it's, you know, I use the analogy, I mean, you carry the ball 80 yards and they're gonna help you with the last 20 yards.
Yeah.
And then, so it's not, so some of them, like, you know, Sandy said, and there's 80 different programs now, some of them very specifically towards rural areas. But it's as much about that, when they had the questions, they wanna know about the jobs created. The disadvantaged communities, there are a lot of characteristics and metrics that may not necessarily have aligned with it. It's very specific to what that program is, connecting communities or whatever. The metrics are very specific that may not have been worked on already. I said, you really gotta have something, if not the design, not the design plans, but at least your record of decision environmentally. It's sort of gotta be there, and that's sort of the advice when municipalities ask me
Yeah.
about that.
And, you know, to that point, I mean, that's one of the things that we were talking in the meeting this morning about, like, is there another role for the staff here to play in that? Is there a way we can use some of these resources we have access to help with some of those steps? We don't know the answers, but I mean, that's something we can help explore, moving forward. So, you know, we talked a little bit about the Unified Planning Work Program. Now you know why that word program is there. You know, again, that's the resource, you know, any idea you guys have, whether it's specific to your community or something you've been thinking about, like, hey, why doesn't this region do X? You know, or I traveled to Miami and I saw this going on there, or I went to Minnesota and boy, their traffic signal stuff is top notch, right? There are things that we know, and, you know, we try to do the best we can in all of this stuff, but we can't be top dog in all areas, right? And we know there's areas that we can do better, as a region and even as a state in some cases. So, but if there's something that, you know, you folks have as an idea, that might lead to something that could be studied region-wide, even beyond your borders, bring it up. Feel free to bring it up. Your ideas and input are always welcome here.
Do you think, I mean, it's probably worth mentioning, I know we had a lot of discussion about the discretionary being a big chunk of it, but the off the top planning money that went to the, was inclusive of the increase in federal funding, also included a pretty good increase in for the NPO, for your study purposes and staff purposes, which
Right.
is, you know, I mean, those are extremely helpful. We have a really good success rate of things that went through the linkage program or even the in-house work program activities that end up being something that's funded on the core program. You know, I don't care what the community is. I mean, we've got a safety issue, we've got a pedestrian problem, we got everything. Even a smaller study magnitude like that, it allows you to framework and gives us a scope of work. That instead of just, we've got an anecdotal problem, you actually got an accident rate or
Mhm.
you know, something else that's going on that helps there. So there was that recognition of, even though a lot of the money is being going to be discretionary on there, I think nationally, more planning resource money was allocated to all the NPOs.
Yeah, and that's definitely why we were able to do such a robust ask last year for planning studies, because we had more resources to put toward it. You know, and I think once things filter through, we'll be able to go back to that, you know. But there's no doubt we're very proud of, and we have a lot of examples in this region that without some of these community-based plans, even accessing some of these, whether it's TAP program or some of these other resources, might not have happened. Even some of those state programs, you know, that we don't talk about here, you know, all of the stuff that happens to the Regional Development Council and the CFAs and all of that. You know, we've seen a lot of our work be put into those programs and have success getting awards. So there's a lot of ways we can implement these plans beyond just the tip. And, you know, that's where this dialogue can happen, you know, with all of us, because I think, you know, there's a lot of opportunity to learn from each other, you know, as we progress a lot of these ideas.
No, I think your group has done an excellent job on that, and providing communities like Ballston Spa, you know, that upfront money to do the planning and provide the consultants and all of that. One thought would, you know, you're talking about what else you could do, is somehow collect from communities their sort of priority, you know, what are their major issues? Just generally, you know, well, we really like to fix our sidewalks, or we have this real issue here, and sort of collect all of that and then match when there's a grant opportunity to communicate, hey, this grant just is released. It fits your problem. You might want to consider applying for it. And then maybe some, I don't know, it's kind of messy, because if it's a grant through CRTC, I'm trying to get the
I know,
initials right.
it's gonna take a minute.
You know, there's that conflict of interest, but even just, you know, from some communities that aren't, you know, I just stumbled into this place.
Yep.
And then was, oh, where you from? Well, I'm trustee in Ballston Spa. Oh, you wanna be on this school? Yeah, okay. Soon I'll be off because I'm not rerunning, but, you know, it's a wealth of information. The staff is excellent. You know, it's been the most fruitful place, you know, for the village to move forward. Technical assistance on our comp plan, which we just completed. You know, we applied for stuff, some we got, some we didn't, but, you know, to reach out to the other communities that don't stumble into the room like me. You know, what are your issues?
Yep.
You know, and then match them up with some grant money.
Yeah, and I think that line of thinking is where the long range plan process comes in, and I think we'll certainly be trying to do that. You know, and for you folks that we have familiarity with, that's a little easier. The folks that we cold call from, you know, communities that we don't see around here, that gets a little trickier. It's not for lack of trying, so we may be relying on to some degree, that's where our county partners really do come in, because you guys have the FaceTime with some of these communities that we might not. And can help us make these connections and you know.
Use the counties to be the go-between.
Right,
Or something.
and I feel like sometimes we underutilize the counties here in our world, because you guys do have relationships with communities that, you know, we staff might not necessarily have on a day-to-day basis. But you, I'm looking at you as our county rep in the room.
Hey, I just took a trip to the village of Schuylerville, so I know.
But you would have a different perspective than, you know, some of our counterparts here at the table, because you're hearing this stuff at your, you know, in your case, supervisors meetings, or, count, you know, the county legislative meetings or whatever the term is, in your county, but these are definitely things that we're gonna try to do as part of that long range plan update.
Yeah, Sandy, my point, I've made this bunch, I talked with Bob about it and all these things with that. The city's perspective, my perspective, and from other municipalities, I would think is just that. I don't know how you increase capacity at the municipal level. Because, I've worked with CRTC and DOT for over a decade, and there is no way to duplicate the person at the municipality.
Yeah.
And the issue with that is that, I have right now, let's say, 15 consultants, really that work right in my office with me, but all of it, they come to you, they come to me as the mayor needs to sign this, this is gonna go on your letterhead, what's your federal ID number? This needs to go to council, right? A consultant can do so much, you guys can do so much, I mean, even the pavement inventory that you guys did. Right, it comes back, these are the results.
Yeah.
Right, if you wanna change your chips, okay, you have to bring all these things to legislation, have them removed by the city. Come back, get the council to remove these, go to and I'm like, holy God, for 0.5 miles, we're not gonna skip that.
Right.
But because, and it's great, the process is there, but just like these things. There's no way that a consultant or the CDOT or DOT can do what I do or what the municipality does. But you could email me a lot, and you can tell me that I'm not doing it, and that's the problem, is that there needs to be more at the municipalities. Because, she's going to a land bank meeting, and I'm going to a pool meeting. And those are fund sources, like we talk about busting, DOT about fund sources you don't know about. ARPA, CFA, right? We talk about the fund sources that aren't even transportation related that we have to work with. We just got a $500,000 SAM grant. And it's great, we just did it. Big check, assemblyman there, right? And at the end I said, I need the GDA. And they go, I don't know what the GDA is. I'm like, it's the agreement that will pay us. And they said, no, Philip Fields has the money. I said, Philip Fields is writing me a check.
Right.
$500,000.
Right.
But once again, it's so all of a sudden they have a press conference, but they don't realize that we're actually starting from ground zero. Because we have nothing. So until that whole process is done, which is preliminary application, secondary preliminary application, and then the DocuSign process happens, there isn't a project, but they just ribbon cut it like there is a project.
Oh, yeah.
So those are all the things that are going on. So it's like somebody telling me that I have to do the GDA is like, that's not as helpful. And then if I gave it to somebody, a consultant, all they would say is, okay, well, you need to bring this to your comptroller, your mayor, I need this filled out, do that. And when you have all this done, then I'll mail it for you. And it's like,
Yeah.
I don't need you to mail this for me, and now with DocuSign, they can't even do that because
Yes.
I have to do it. And then I'll get the emails of, well, did you see my DocuSign email? And I go, I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's a rant in a way, but it's also just. Because I've talked about ad consultants, I could have 1 million consultants, but all they're gonna be doing is telling me what I need to be doing. And I'm tired of having 1 million people telling me what I need to be doing.
Yeah.
No, and I hear you. I mean, I think you're not alone. I mean, all the communities in this room probably can say the exact same things, we sometimes, even at staff level here, get worried that this range of stuff that we're doing and how we're calling upon you, Chris, and you, you know what I mean? The same 10, 15 people who are already doing so many things that there's not enough capacity. So, that's one of the things, like, I'm sitting here, I don't have the answer. I don't know how the staff here can help. Some of these things we just might not be able to help. But maybe there are some things that we can look into, and maybe there's some models from other places that we haven't thought of.
That's a good
There's circuit rider programs that some places have run, You might not be able to help with some of the technical stuff like DocuSigns or whatever, but they might be able to help you with putting together material for your boards, or, I don't know, and I don't have the answers, but these are definitely things that we've heard and we'll
One of
explore.
the things is just examples of other successful applications. I mean, that's often where, if I'm applying, because I apply for all kinds of grants professionally, I do healthcare grants. First thing I do is do a FOIL request and ask for the successful ones from the year before and see how they wrote it and what information they put in them. So even a library of successful applications to these programs would be a resource, you know, PDF, of course, that, you know, we could request and learn from somebody else who was successful.
Do you have, sorry.
Okay.
Do you have grant support capacity? Like, do you help with the right grants? Do you help?
We can help with data and we can help with technical work, but we can't write.
Grant.
Largely because of our nature and the fact that we're a member. Remember, the MPO is really a policy board, so how would we choose to do something for this, you know, over Saratoga or Albany, right?
Still
So
gotta do it. Design.
we can definitely, you know, provide support. Data collection, and we can help with elements of an application or a grant, but we can't actually write it. But even that line is getting graded, some, I know the New York City MPO is exploring that possibility, you know, so if they can make it work down in New York City, maybe there's a model here, I don't know. It needs to be seen.
Again, you know, as a resource, who do I go to if I want a grant written for
Right.
this type of project? You know, is it independents, like someone like me in healthcare, or, you know, a civil engineering firm is doing that? So, you know, I need to get started. You know, maintain a list. I'm sure all the consultants would be happy to get on it with a
Yeah.
little description of what else, what they've already done. That's what
I
you
think-
want to look at.
You know, hearing from folks about how projects can get stuck sometimes or how we're not positioned to apply. I think workshops or a little hand holding on the environmental review process and regulatory requirements, because they vary from agency to agency. And, you know, tips and tricks to move things along quicker, I think is helpful. It's not related to here, but I have a HUD grant, and navigating their process for environmental review is completely different than navigating any other agency's process for environmental review. So I think that might help, depending on the grant profile, to be able to say, these are the steps you need accomplished. This is the traditional timeline. These are the resources that communities have relied upon. These are responsibilities that solely are on your shoulders versus a consultant can provide services for you. I think that sort of thing is helpful in teeing up projects, but also helping people to have the proper expectations before they start advancing a project, how things will go.
That's very, thank you.
Saying to the non-voting members,
Mhm.
feel welcome to come and sit here, because a lot of times it's not like you said, like Castleton, I know that was
Yep.
throughway authorities, but you would think the village or Skodak would want to know what's going on, and maybe one of them should have been here, and Bill left now.
Yeah,
Bill's gonna go back. He can barely, you know, like one of the screens says, he's got 300 and whatever signals, can barely do that department.
right.
So how is he gonna be able to tell the planning department of the city of Albany what they're gonna, and each time one of them does something or doesn't do something, it directly affects what we do at the port.
Sure.
So sometimes I'll call Bill and then he'll say, you should have called Randy, and then I'll say, well, Randy, that's for DOT, so now I'm screwed. So.
Yeah.
And I know, like Chris said, their bandwidth is tight, but at least on the city level, maybe county level. It seems like 2 or 3 people should be here for these bigger meetings, so they know what's going on. They know if Bob says, well, by the way, we're gonna repave 30 miles and it's gonna go through 8 towns. It'd be nice if 16 people heard that instead of 6. I know we send an email to 30 of them, but sometimes when you're face to face and you hear it or you see it on the screen and go, wow, that's big. I gotta call A, B, and C.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I tried, you know, when I first take over here, I met with a lot of our elected officials as the starting point, who we haven't seen in a while here. And I said, why, what's going on? Why don't we see you anymore? And they all had their reasons, you know, some are personal, some are just circumstance, but you know, it's been harder to get them interested. It's these one-offs, to your point, like, you know, something on the scale of the throughway authorities ask today, not that, you know, it's a grant award, we understand this, but it wasn't competitive funding, but I don't know what Castleton does or doesn't know about that project. Or how it impacts them. Even the Nam Nations. I happen to know that that area is a very important area to one of our tribal nations in this region, and, I don't know if they know about this project. So, we can do the best we can when we see a TIP amendment or a project proposal, maybe to ensure that we're sending it, making those folks aware. It's getting the staff contact beyond the elected officials. Sometimes that's what's challenging about it.
Yeah, sometimes things get to a mayor and don't go any further.
Right, exactly.
Well, in Saratoga County, I mean, just kind of had, as Bob alluded, a lot of retirements and things like that, planning board members have completely turned over.
Mhm.
Staff is turned over. I mean, your town clerks are now your planning and zoning clerks for like everything. So trying to figure out, okay, they're trying to figure out, what, you say, okay, no, do you guys have a TDE? They're like, what's that?
Right.
Okay, great. Let's
Right.
do it again. Let's get you a list of consultants and things like that. So, as that process has transpired coming out of COVID, I know that's been a huge challenge in Saratoga County.
So we're in the process of, and we've been working with a grants consultant firm out of Pennsylvania for the last year, and we're in the process of, or evaluating responses to RFPs, and in the planning department, we're working on a grants process. And I'm almost wondering, because I feel like to compile a list, what happens is lists get compiled and it's relevant the day that it's compiled, and then 6 years later, someone stumbles on it. So it seems like that's a lot of energy to put into a list. But I think what's been really successful for us with the grants consultants is giving them the list of responsibilities that they have to help us with the grants, from the application process through, hey, we're running into matching fund issue, do you have matching funds? Like the whole process that, like how they have the designated engineers, you had designated grants consultants that would have a list that you could refer communities to, that would have a list of requirements to help them facilitate everything they needed to gather to successfully not just apply for, but receive and then administer a grant, because it's a huge, the whole process is enormous. And if you have multiple ones going while you're also administering projects, it's just an overwhelming amount of.
And I know we've kind of talked about a new opportunity, having Randy Milano leave Albany City from a local government perspective, going into the local programs bureau, because he has that knowledge, having managed federal aid projects in a community. And now is probably gonna learn quickly, I would think.
Yeah.
The range of things that are happening in the broader, in your case, 8-county region, but it might be a good idea to follow up on that thought of maybe there's a way we can work with the local programs. You're kind of make some of those details, checklists, whatever they are, more easily accessible to people.
I think, I mean, a local program book has some pretty good resources in there in terms of checklists. When it comes for the infrastructure projects, I mean, it's mostly the same consultant who are putting the applications together. I think the discretionary, as I mentioned, the discretionary one, because you need so much work done up front, it's not the same thing with any of our consultant partners. I think most are very readily to help with a TAP CMAC or Bridge New York thing. It's not nearly the same amount of staff hours involved as to put together a connecting communities thing that probably has a couple hundred hours in it. I mean, somebody's gotta get paid for that. So, I think those are there. I mean, purposely, I can't speak for Randy. He probably would have said the same thing Chris said about, sort of frustrations of being a city manager right now with all the things that are out there, but purposely having Randy involved with the infrastructure committee here and how our selections go with direct input from somebody that had those sort of experiences. I think that should be invaluable to that group, and we want to get him right involved with that. There is, it's interesting to think that, that you foil them to get the application, because we're very, there is kind of a proprietary, particularly the application itself. Certainly, I mean, you're very good at post reports and to get the ideas of the things that were done on there, but I'd give you the same answer. You would need to foil it if you wanted to know the successful TAP applications and the reviews of those, because there is no
one wants to give away their
sort of element.
sauce, how they apply, but that's why I foiled, because I look at those and basically, you know, take a look at what they did and then try to replicate something for the project I was, you know, to get granted.
And you're doing that in a professional capacity as a grants writer, not in your role with city government or with.
Well, no, I'm doing it basically with, you know, I've written grants for, you know, the village.
Right, but like that skill comes from your work. for
Oh, yeah,
hospitals,
that's one reason
so-
I ran. I said, I think I have some,
Yeah.
something I can offer the village.
Right.
So maybe training for grants consultants would be
Maybe.
a helpful tool.
So we-
Because, I mean, there are a lot of independent grants consultants that you can hire.
Right, but you have to be, so you mentioned hiring engineering consultants to help with grant writing. But you have to be cautious with that too, because they also, if they want to do the design work.
Yeah.
Further down the road, that's what they can, you know.
Right.
Is that actually, I don't know, legal or, you know, because a lot of consultants, it's like, yeah, we'll write that grant for you, but then you're gonna hire us to do the design work. If there isn't a prohibition against that sort of thing, because I don't think in healthcare you could get away with that.
You definitely have to be, like Ryan said, have to be very careful and kind of like very specific scope of services that you're looking to do and to not, you know, connecting with them and make an understanding of, okay, we don't want to be to like, have to exclude you from this next part of the process if you're interested in doing it. So, making sure you're clear on that on the front.
Yeah, but also the flip side of it is you write this grant and you're gonna hire them.
But you don't have to hire engineers. I mean,
No,
the
you
ones
can
we
write
use are,
writers.
they're,
Yeah, you can write special, you just have to be cautious thinking.
Yeah.
It's been mentioned here, so I just. wanna
Yeah,
make
but
sure.
on a lot of grants that are more technical, you do use civil or transportation engineering firm. And, you know, there's the expectation that, yeah, we'll write the grant for you without charging you and then you'll hire us.
no, but you
You
don't
get
have to, like, ours are not, like, they just specialize in federal grant opportunities.
Oh, no, yeah, there's,
So then
okay,
you supplement in the narrative, you get information from your technical experts,
right,
but the actual grants consultants that we use, they keep track of what all of the opportunities are.
right.
And then,
No,
Yeah.
that's more what,
Maybe I'm into the weeds too much there,
Okay.
maybe for another session.
Okay.
I mean, it's interesting. We actually had a debriefing last week with Federal Highway for one of the discretionary programs, an application we put in. And it was basically said, sounded like an engineer wrote the narrative. Yes, we get that the bridge is gonna be replaced, but you know, sort of, what are the broader impacts to it? And that was fundamentally
Well,
about. our-
and there is an art to writing a good grant application that, you know, certain, it is a skill set that not everybody has, and you're right, I mean, if you're coming at it from through the lens of an engineer. You're used to writing it's a different writing style, because you're documenting things in a different way than you are. Sort of the lighter, fluffier, you know.
the sales job.
All those
How
things
are
they
you
want,
selling
the
your
economic
project?
development, the job creation, those are the things,
Yeah.
and we're talking about bridge condition. They
Right.
don't, they wanna see just that.
Right,
and-
grant writing is a sales job.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's all I had to share. Did anybody else wanted to?
Well, I think we were gonna sort of supplement that. I had some more slides, but I were kind of down in the weeds about particular fund categories and maybe for another session
Yeah.
or something here. I think, at least from DOT's perspective, I think it's important. I've always viewed it as a partnership and a litmus test that was sort of there for both, you know, that it's in particular federal highway and FTA that require projects beyond the tip and the STIP for the metropolitan area to make sure that it's not just about condition and things, that it's about broader societal goals and fitting in the needs of the municipality, even though, you know, CDTA is the only transit provider, they still have a lot of constituent base in the municipalities that they're answerable to of where they're gonna make the investments in and why it's at the table, and it's specifically like FAA or the maritime, so they don't go to the tip, but they're very specific functional sort of activities that. So I don't wanna, the last point, I mean, it's not losing that we are not outside of the state budget process either. Because these are all reimbursement programs. Everything is first instance by the state of New York and then go see reimbursement here. So when you hear discussion about, you know, the state budget is late or there's an MOU between upstate or downstate. And this, gets to the point about the discretionary programs, even though there may be formulas that say it needs to be in the urban area. X amount of the flex funds needs to be in the large urban area, middle urban area. It does not say that Albany gets X% and Syracuse gets X% like that. It's given, that number is given to the state of New York, who then has to filter the layer between the legislature saying, half is upstate and half is downstate or whatever. So I just don't want to lose it that we're not immune to the state budget deliberations as well,
Yeah,
even
we
with the
know.
distribution of the federal aid.
No, I know,
It may not be readily apparent.
It's not, it's not that it's not transparent, it's a layer that a lot of us don't have a direct role in, and so, yeah, we are beholden to the formula, even a population-based formula, like our PL funds are tied to our population. But there's a formula that's created to decide how much money we actually get here in New York. So yeah, there's other layers involved in all of this.
And I would say we get to the net positive with that, sometimes when we come with funds like that, I say they come to the table and they were off the top or state committee. It's usually because Hudson Valley or New York City or Long Island job got deferred and got delayed, and all of a sudden there was $60 more million to be spread upstate like that. And then we want to be in a position to make sure that we can capitalize on that money. So it's not always when I say, well, it doesn't affect the current allocations on here. It still came from somewhere. Somebody else wasn't spending it and
Right.
ended up being able to come at this table. So while we're nowhere near what the used to be, the allocated fund sources, I still think we position ourselves to be there to recoup as much as we can from other parts of the state that may not deliver.
Right, and something that's not seen by us is the work that Bob and his team does internally to capture those funds when they see them, like, oh, wow, there's X dollars available because something didn't happen in some other part of the state. We know we need it here in the region. And
Every August, there's a redistribution on the
Yeah.
Fed side of states that aren't delivering in a particular fund source, and it's usually around NHBP or safety funds, not so everybody spends the flex funding.
Yeah,
Pretty,
the flex funding goes quick, and then, that's why we're investing in the safety plan. That's exactly why we're investing in the safety plan. I see a huge opportunity there for us to access some money that we might not otherwise have access to, so. So hopefully this was helpful. Again, it's a two-way street, as much as we rely on you, bring stuff to our attention too, and we're happy to work with you folks moving forward. If you have additional thoughts or questions moving forward, we'll probably I was thinking of doing another one of these next year, maybe in the early summer before we really dive into the tip update, because that's where I think a lot of things we were going to talk about will be relevant. Because I know the tip is a confusing, challenging process, particularly for those of you who've never been through one before. So, and hopefully, I'm gonna hope that New York State makes it a little easier on us this year.
got $1, we got $5 worth of need. How do you want to spend it? That's basically the discussion.
Always the
Can I
case.
ask a question about expectations around funding with the tip?
Yeah.
So let's say we have projects that we know that we want to do, but they're not, we haven't done anything other than just conceptual, maybe a feasibility study. Timeline wise, what is a reasonable expectation to get funding for that project?
Well,
Like if it's all successful,
well, in an ideal world.
good and ideal.
Let's say you had a plan that was just completed and you're like, hey, we have this $10 million quarter project that's ready to go for the next step. If you were to apply for that next year, you compete for funding. That's the part we can't sit here and say, like, would it win
Yeah.
the award, right? That would be the ideal path. Once it gets on the tip, the next question is, what year is it being assigned to? Because it may get assigned 2 or 3 years out, depending on the availability of the program. That kind of comes back to what we were kind of alluding to in the meeting this morning. For every project that rolls and rolls out, those are gonna get dibs on the first funds for those first years of the new tip. So when you come to the table and you say, I've got this project, oh, and by the way, we can program it, but it probably won't be available, money won't be available for 3 more years. That's not an unheard of thing here. And then you couple that with other things,
The price
The type
rises.
project.
Sure.
the type of project makes a difference too.
Generally, a national highway system or safety funds has more direct path to getting on the program when it's competing for the larger pot, the flex funds,
Yeah.
there's just more competition for that amount of dollars.
But to your point, I mean, maybe that's something we should be highlighting in some way to folks in the solicitation is the ones that, when you're thinking about your local priorities, how does it tie into some of those fund sources?
Right.
You know, maybe that's something we can work into the process as well.
And our only opportunity, like, we have a once in a 3-year opportunity to get things on the tip, which is what starts the process for all of this other funding.
Well, for sort of like these core program funds, like the acronyms again, the Surface Transportation Program and the National Highway Program, those two in particular really are only every 3 years. But within that, like TAP CMAC generally has been coming out every other year these days. We have a Bridge New York program, I assume it probably will be another 2 years out, I'm guessing another year. There are periodic kind of specialty programs that the state runs. But they're not on a regular cycle, so they're not reliable in terms of like, and this is where I know local governments have another challenge, right? Because you guys have to budget for this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if your budget cycles are off the timelines of these applications, and then you find out, oh yeah, by the way, it's not gonna get funded for another 3 years, and oh, and then, by the way, there's a new mayor that came in, and oh, that mayor doesn't support that project, you know, it's another one of the layers of challenges that we have to work through. But these are all things that can be overcome. We all work together. Keeps us happy, keeps us busy.
It is time consuming too, you know, tip process, by the time Jacob said, yeah, we got it, go ahead. Been just rolling on this, and tomorrow night, our town board is voting on the DOT contract and stuff, so it's finally, you know, it's just been a process just to get there.
Right,
And, you know, it's just, one step after the other, and, you know, working with DOT, they review their process, you know, our internal getting documents together, getting people involved. It takes time.
And that's just to get your application ready to present.
Well, that's
put
after
on
the
the tip.
typical.
Oh, you
Okay.
got the award, it's all that
So then
process.
this,
Yeah.
it's been almost a year,
Yeah,
and we're signing the contract now.
yeah, that's it. I mean, when you get the award, you say, oh, great. Well, then you gotta get the contract signed, and then you gotta get an RFP out for who's gonna work on it. And then it could be a year later.
Yeah.
And you haven't even started on the project.
So as a resource, that presentation to elected officials would be super. helpful.
well, and
Yeah.
I kind of talked to some policy board members about whether something like that would be helpful for them, and you know, and trying to get them to come and be a part of the conversation. As a lot of you know, you're also attending the policy board on their behalf in a lot of cases, and you know, again, look, we know everybody's super busy, and I understand that. Not everybody, how do we reach them, you know? And I tried going individually to people. I do feel like a luncheon workshop might be one way to get their attention if we can figure out and plan it out far enough, you know, and to try it. And hopefully we get a good number of folks to attend, because I know it's hard to understand. It's hard for them to understand this process, but also know kind of the limits, you know, as I said, what are the expectations?
Well, it's
you know?
certain counties, the county board of supervisors, you know, and potentially a workshop after
That
one of
might
their
be
meetings.
us.
Yeah, that would be good, because you've got the group
Cause
there.
they're there.
Yeah.
And they
just-
could then report back at council meetings or whatever, what the, just kind of what the timelines are.
The only thing is in Saratoga County, the villages aren't on the board of supervisors. So you might need a separate meeting for the villages, or invite them to that,
I
because.
wouldn't
they-
want to lose the sort of homework piece of it though. I mean, particularly, I mean, if they're right-of-way issues, if they're complicated right-of-way issues,
Yeah.
if they're complicated environmental issues, and they really haven't been started. I mean, you can see in a competitive environment, I mean, that's not probably gonna survive the first cut
Yeah.
of the projects. It's just the reality of, you know, when you funded, the need is several multiples of the available money that's there.
Yeah.
So, and the idea that I wanna build sidewalks from Main Street to Smith Street, I mean, that's a scope of work that can be around. That's why the linkage studies and things that we talked about are being so funny, the feasibility studies, like you mentioned, that you actually got a buildable scope of work that doesn't have, you know, a lot of external sort of issues. Those naturally rise right to the top in our sort of discussions, because we want to deliver them within that 3-year window also, and not like we talked about earlier, this wave of money that sort of has to go into it. We've never cut anybody off at this table to say you didn't deliver it in that 3 years. You haven't even started it, you know, but that may be a hard discussion depending on what the rollover looks like next time. If there are a couple dog projects in there, then that may be a conversation.
Exactly, and so, yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some ideas that you guys have offered that we can think about and, you know, we'll continue talking, but. Again, you know, thanks for sticking around, hopefully this was helpful. And we'll definitely, you know, do something like this again, you know, in the spring, maybe when we're getting closer to doing a tip. Where we can kind of zero in on that a little bit more. That will be helpful for folks. Alright, well, thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody listening online.
Danny and I are doing a similar presentation this evening, if anybody's ready.